In June of 1944, an American intelligence officer on Saipan laid an aerial photograph under a lamp and found two pale scratches on the northwest corner of Tinian. White Beach 1, 160 feet wide. White Beach 2, 130 feet wide. Together they were barely more than a mistake in the coral. Too narrow for a proper landing. Too tight for trucks. Too exposed for artillery. Too small for the kind of invasion the United States Marines had been fighting across the Pacific. Every manual said the same thing. You do not put two Marine divisions through a doorway that narrow. That was exactly why it might work. 3 miles away, across the channel, the Japanese commander on Tinian believed he understood the Americans. Colonel Kiyoshi Sagata had watched Tarawa. He had studied Rainamur. He had seen what happened when American landing craft came in behind battleship fire and carrier strikes. The Americans needed beaches, not little strips of coral. Real beaches. Wide enough to land in waves. Wide enough to unload guns. Wide enough to stack ammunition, fuel, food, radio equipment, medical tents, tractors, trucks, and all the heavy machinery that turned a foothold into an army. Ogata's conclusion was not foolish. It was professional. It was logical, and it was almost fatal to everyone under his command, because Tinian was not just another island. Tinian was a long coral shelf in the Marianas, wrapped mostly in cliffs, sitting within bomber range of Japan if the right airfields could be built. The Japanese knew the island mattered. The Americans knew it mattered more, so Ogata built the battle he expected. He fortified the southwest around Tinian town, where the harbor and beach made sense. He covered Asiga Bay. He laid mines where landing craft should have gone. He placed artillery where American planners were supposed to appear. He turned the obvious beaches into killing grounds, and in the northwest near Ushi Point, he left only a small screening force, because White 1 and White 2 were not beaches in the way an army meant the word. They were cracks. But somebody on Saipan kept looking at the photograph, not asking, "Is this suitable?" Asking a better question. What would happen if we made it suitable for one morning? That question changed the Pacific War. For 3 weeks, American planners built an invasion around the part of Tinian the defenders had discounted. Engineers modified amphibious tractors so their ramps could climb over the coral ledge at the edge of the sand. Staff officers calculated traffic flow through a landing space that should have choked the assault. Naval gunfire plans were redrawn. Communication nets were layered. Artillery sequencing was tightened until the landing no longer depended on having a beach. It depended on using a gap faster than the enemy could believe it was a gap. Then they built a deception around the obvious answer. On the morning of July 24, 1944, Japanese observers saw what they expected to see. Landing craft gathered off Tinian town. Warships opened fire on the southern defenses. Carrier aircraft hit the positions Ogata had spent months preparing. Reports moved through Japanese command posts. The Americans were coming exactly where doctrine said they would come. Ogata's reserves shifted toward the south. His guns waited there. His minefields were there. His anti-tank ditches were there. His best answer was aimed at the right place for the wrong battle. Then the landing craft off Tinian town turned away. At 7:45 in the morning, the real landing hit the northwest beaches. A Marine corporal named Raymond Duffy stepped from an LVT onto coral and sand so narrow that the men behind him had to keep moving or the entire assault would clog at the waterline. He was not making history in his own mind. He was making room. One man forward, then another, then another. The modified ramps held. The coral ledge that should have stopped the tractors became a problem already solved. The Japanese screening troops at Ushi Point were overwhelmed before they could become the warning Ogata needed. By mid-morning, roughly 15,000 Marines were ashore through two beaches that Japanese planning had considered irrelevant. Irrelevant. That was the word that killed the plan. Ogata's battle map had been correct in almost every detail. The cliffs were real. The wide beaches mattered. Night counterattack doctrine was reasonable. The Americans did need logistics. The southwest was the conventional landing zone. But the Americans had not prepared for the battle Ogata wanted. They had prepared for the battle his assumptions made possible. By afternoon, Marine artillery had begun coming ashore. Radios were working. Field telephone lines were being dragged through coral dust. Naval guns offshore were tied into the defense. The beachhead was not wide, but it had depth. It had fire control. It had men who had already seen what Japanese night attacks looked like on other islands. They did not need to guess what would come after sunset. They registered the approaches. They dug in. They waited. At 2:00 in the morning, Ogata did exactly what his doctrine told him to do. He threw his mobile reserve at the beachhead. Infantry and tanks came from multiple directions in the dark, trying to break through before dawn, before American strength became permanent. It was the right Japanese answer to the wrong American position. The Type 97 tanks moved into fire zones that had already been measured. They did not reach the beach. The infantry behind them advanced into gaps the tanks had failed to open. They did not reach the beach either. By sunrise, the counterattack had been destroyed. About 2,000 Japanese troops had been lost in a single night action. The mobile force that might have slowed the American advance for days had been spent in hours against a prepared perimeter. Tinian was not over, but the decision was bending. The remaining Japanese defenders fell back through cane fields, limestone ridges, ravines, caves, and broken coral. The fighting became the kind of fighting the Pacific made infamous. A few yards at a time, men disappearing into green walls of sugarcane, fire coming from holes in rock, positions that had to be found before they could be taken. This was where the cost became intimate. Not a grand counterattack, not a map arrow. A cave mouth, a ridgeline, a burst of fire from 6 feet away, a man crawling close enough to finish what artillery could not. And on Tinian, something new came into that limestone darkness. Napalm. A jellied incendiary weapon, used in Pacific combat there for the first time, did what high explosives often could not do inside caves. It did not need to crack the whole position open. It consumed the air and the shelter together. The caves that had survived bombs were not built to survive fire that followed men inside. By July 30, Tinian town had fallen. By July 31, Ogata gathered the remnants he could still command and led a final dawn attack from the southern end of the island. Most of those men died with him or soon after. On August 1, the island was declared secured. 9 days. About 500 Japanese dead. 355 Marines dead. A battle so one-sided by the standards of Pacific Island fighting that it almost looks unreal on paper. But the most important work on Tinian did not begin after the shooting stopped. It began while the shooting was still happening. The Navy construction battalions, the Seabees, had landed with the assault force on July 24. By July 26, while Marines were still fighting south through cane and coral, construction crews were already working at Ushi Point. They were not simply repairing a Japanese strip. They were building an air base larger than anything the Pacific had seen. 4 parallel runways, each 8,000 feet long. Enough taxiway, hard stand, fuel storage, repair space, and loading infrastructure to support the largest bomber in the American arsenal. The B-29 Superfortress. The B-29 was not just a bigger bomber. It was a logistical demand with wings. It needed long runways. It needed maintenance crews trained on pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, complex engines, and systems that had never been asked to perform at this scale over that distance. It needed fuel and volumes that turned an island into a machine. It needed a base close enough to Japan to make the round trip with a meaningful bomb load. That was why Tinian mattered. Not because the island was large, because its location was exact. From Tinian, a fully loaded B-29 could reach the Japanese home islands and return. From the wrong island it could not. So the Seabees moved coral and earth by the hundreds of thousands of cubic yards. They worked in shifts that did not really end. They crushed coral into roadbed. They graded jungle into geometry. They turned Ushi Point into North Field, a set of runways pointed toward Japan before many of the men building them understood what exactly would leave from those runways. The Marines had taken the island in 9 days. The Seabees turned it into a weapon, and at first that weapon did not work. In November 1944, the first B-29 raids from the Marianas flew against Japan. 66 aircraft went toward Tokyo. 17 reached the target area. The bombs that did fall often scattered so badly that the results were almost meaningless. High winds at altitude, especially the jet stream over Japan, carried bomb patterns miles away from their aiming points. Cloud cover hid targets. Cold damaged equipment. The doctrine that had looked so clean in training became chaos at 30,000 feet. General Haywood Hansel, commanding X-1 Bomber Command from Saipan, believed in daylight precision bombing. He had helped shape the theory. He believed the B-29 could climb high, fly above the worst defenses, look through the Norden bomb site, and destroy specific industrial targets with scientific force. That was not a fantasy. It was an idea ahead of its tools. Over Japan in late 1944, the tools failed. Washington read the reports. The most expensive aircraft program in American history was burning fuel, crews, and maintenance hours without producing the strategic result it had promised. General Henry Hap Arnold wanted proof that the B-29 could change the war. Hansel could not give him that proof fast enough, so in January 1945, Arnold sent another general to the Marianas, Curtis LeMay. LeMay arrived on Guam and did what he had always done well. He read the numbers without asking them to be polite. High altitude, daylight, precision. Over Japan, the math was broken. The wind did not respect doctrine. The clouds did not open because a planning chart wanted them to. The bomb site could not make a target visible through weather, distance, and a river of air moving at terrifying speed. LeMay called his commanders together and told them he was changing the campaign. They would go low, they would go at night, they would carry incendiaries. And then came the part that made the room go quiet. He would strip most of the defensive guns out of the B-29s. Guns, gunners, ammunition, weight, all removed, except for the tail guns. At low altitude, the bombers would be inside the range envelope that the B-29 had been designed to avoid. Fighters could reach them. Anti-aircraft fire could reach them. Everything about the aircraft's original survival plan had been built on flying high. LeMay was proposing to do the opposite. But the lower they flew, the less fuel they burned climbing. The less weight they carried in guns, the more incendiaries they could carry in the bomb bay. And the target was no longer a single factory roof seen through clouds from 6 miles above the earth. The target was the industrial city itself. Because Japan's war production was not arranged like Germany's. Much of it ran through smaller workshops, subcontractors, home factories, rail links, storage yards, and neighborhoods where wooden buildings packed the machinery of war into the fabric of civilian life. High explosives aimed at a single plant through jet stream winds had failed. Fire did not require that kind of precision. On the night of March 9, 1945, 334 B-29s took off from the Marianas, from Tinian, from Saipan, from Guam. They crossed the ocean toward Tokyo at night, flying far lower than the doctrine had allowed, carrying M69 incendiary clusters designed for Japanese urban construction. The lead aircraft marked the target. The force behind them dropped into fire, and the wind did the rest. The first fires joined. Then the second wave fed them. Then the third wave made separate fires into one moving thing. Tokyo's wooden districts became a furnace. The heat pulled air inward. Streets became channels of flame. The fire built its own weather, throwing turbulence into the sky high enough to slam aircraft upward as they passed the edge of it. By morning, 16 square miles of Tokyo had burned. Tens of thousands were dead. 14 B-29s had been lost from the attacking force. It was one of the most destructive air raids in history, and for the American command, the meaning was brutally clear. The B-29 campaign had found a method that worked. In the next 10 days, raids struck Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya again, and Osaka again. By March 19, approximately 32 square miles of Japanese urban and industrial area had been burned out. Japanese air defense officers understood the change. They had not solved how to stop it. The Americans had the bases. They had the aircraft. They had a working method. They did not yet have endless incendiaries. That became the next problem. LeMay's campaign consumed firebombs faster than the supply chain had been prepared to replace them. After the March raids, stocks in the Marianas were tight. Shipping schedules from the United States could not instantly match what the new tactics demanded. The bombing offensive could continue. But the pace mattered. Every pause gave Japan time to disperse workers, shift production, move tools, and adapt. Every week also brought the planned invasion of the home islands closer to its calendar. Operation Downfall, the projected invasion of Japan, carried casualty estimates so large that planners debated them in numbers that were difficult even for wartime Washington to absorb. The fire raids were one answer. The invasion was another. But on Tinian, there was a third answer being prepared in a place most men on the island walked past without understanding. At the northern end of Northfield, near Runway Able, the Seabees built a loading pit. It was not dramatic. It was not huge. A rectangular opening below ground level, designed so a weapon too large for ordinary loading equipment could be lifted up into the bomb bay of a modified B-29. The men who knew its purpose were few. The men who taxied past it on ordinary missions often knew nothing at all. That is one of the strangest things about history. The hinge is rarely shaped like a monument while it is still being used. Sometimes it is a pit in the coral, a ramp that holds, a photograph under a lamp, a beach too narrow to take seriously. By the summer of 1945, the pieces had come together. Tinian had been taken, Northfield had been built. The B-29 campaign had forced Japan under sustained attack from the Marianas, and the Manhattan Project had produced a weapon that required a specific aircraft, a specific loading system, and a specific island close enough to Japan. On the evening of August 5, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay was brought to the loading pit. The aircraft had been modified months earlier. Its commander, Colonel Paul Tibbets, had named it after his mother. The weapon, Little Boy, was roughly 12 feet long and weighed about 9,700 pounds. It was raised from the pit into the aircraft. At 2:45 in the morning on August 6, Enola Gay rolled down Runway Able. The concrete and coral beneath its wheels existed because construction crews had started building while Marines were still fighting 2 miles away. That runway existed because the island had been taken in 9 days. The island had been taken in 9 days because the landing had gone through beaches the Japanese had not believed could carry the weight of an invasion. At 8:15 a.m. over Hiroshima, Little Boy detonated. A single aircraft, a single bomb, a city changed in seconds. The immediate death toll is commonly estimated around 80,000, with many more dying later from burns, injuries, and radiation effects. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, lifted from Tinian carrying Fat Man. Its primary target was Kokura, but cloud cover forced the crew to turn toward Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9, the second atomic bomb detonated. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito's recorded voice was broadcast to the Japanese people. He did not use the simple word that everyone listening would later attach to the moment, surrender. But that is what it was. The war was ending. The chain from White Beach to Hiroshima is sometimes described like symbolism. It was not symbolism. It was logistics. A beach allowed an island. The island allowed a runway. The runway allowed a bomber base. The bomber base allowed sustained attacks on Japan. And one specialized pit on that base allowed one particular aircraft to carry one particular weapon. Remove one link and the chain changes. Maybe the island is still taken, but later. Maybe the airfields are finished, but later. Maybe the bombing campaign shifts its timetable. Maybe the invasion plans move forward under different assumptions. History does not give clean answers to every alternate path, but it gives a very clear answer to what happened on the path that was taken. It began with people who looked at an unsuitable beach and refused to confuse unsuitable with impossible. That was the American advantage at Tinian. Not just ships, not just aircraft, not just the industrial weight of the United States, though all of that mattered. The sharper advantage was conceptual. Ogata prepared for the correct answer according to existing doctrine. The Americans prepared for the answer doctrine had trained him to ignore. The Japanese commander had fortified what made sense. The Americans attacked what did not. And because they made the irrational place work for one morning, every rational defense on the island was pointing the wrong way. The battle was won in the gap between what a map said should happen and what engineers could make happen anyway. After the war, many of the men attached to this story went back into ordinary life, or tried to. Raymond Duffy, the Marine from Pittsburgh, did not become the symbol of Tinian. Most men who make history at the line level do not get to own the history they help make. They move, they hold, they survive, and then the record absorbs them into numbers. 15,000 ashore, 9 days, 355 dead. That is how war remembers groups. It rarely has enough room for the man stepping aside because the man behind him needs the sand. Paul Tibbets lived for decades after Hiroshima and said repeatedly that he had no regrets about flying the mission. He also requested no public grave marker because he understood that any marker could become a battlefield for people still arguing with the event. Curtis LeMay rose through the Air Force and never publicly softened his view of the firebombing campaign. To him, it shortened the war. To others, it remains one of the harshest moral facts in modern warfare. Haywood Hansel, the general LeMay replaced, lived long enough to see precision bombing become what he had believed it could be, but only after technology caught up to an idea that had failed over Japan in 1944. The Seabees went home to build bridges, roads, houses, factories, and ordinary things. They had moved nearly 1 million cubic yards of coral and earth for a base that became one of the most consequential pieces of ground in the 20th century. Most of them did not become famous. That is fitting. Tinian itself never looked like the weight placed on it. Today, jungle has taken back much of Northfield. From the air, the runways still appear as long scars through green. The loading pits remain, protected and marked, small enough that their scale feels wrong when you stand above them. White Beach 1 is still narrow. The coral ledge is still there. At low tide, the place still looks too small. That is the point. The most important decisions in war are not always the loud ones. They are often made in rooms where someone notices that the enemy's certainty has become a wall he cannot see around. Ogata saw cliffs, beaches, doctrine, and arithmetic. The Americans saw the same things. Then they asked one more question. What if the beach does not need to be suitable forever? What if it only needs to be suitable long enough? On July 24, 1944, the ramps dropped. The first Marines moved. The impossible beach became a working door, and through that door came the runway, the bomber, the loading pit, the atomic missions, and the voice on the radio announcing that the war was over. The war did not begin to end when the bomb fell. It began to bend when someone looked at a beach too small to matter and refused to let the manual have the final word.